The 2024 Formula One season has just come to a close. We've got Max Verstappen as the Drivers' Champion, McLaren as the Constructors' Champions for the first time since 1998, and we had some incredible moments. Personally, I enjoyed the season opener in Bahrain and the season closer in Abu Dhabi. There were also some great storylines throughout the whole season. We had the comeback of Daniel Ricciardo, the slow fall of Red Bull, just to have them come back again, as well as some driver changes with Daniel Ricciardo, Franco Colapinto, Logan Sargeant, and Liam Lawson. Overall, it was a pretty good season. All things considered, what more can you ask for in Formula One? A title fight? We had one in the Constructors, we kinda had one in the Drivers, but Lando gave up way too early and didn't even really think he had one. That's a story for another day. But throughout the whole season, there was some really bad drivers who didn't live up to expectations and ultimately dropped the ball of where they should have been. Today I wanted to count down my top 5 worst drivers for the 2024 Formula One season. Unfortunately, as an Australian, starting in number 5, I'm putting Daniel Ricciardo. Now, for context, Daniel Ricciardo was coming to 2024 season with the RB second team. This is his final chance at Formula One. He had his heyday with Red Bull, he switched to Renault, was smashing it, and then when the regulations changed and he moved to McLaren, he hasn't been the same ever since. He had the highlight in Monza in 2021, which was incredible, but besides that one event, it's been fairly dreadful, to be honest. 2024 was supposed to be where that changes. It was his redemption arc. There was stories that he was on the simulators and he had good times and everything looked great. In 2023, where he took over for those last few races before breaking his hand or wrist, he looked pretty good. But going into 2024, he just didn't live up to the expectations he was supposed to. If we look at the statistics, Yuki Tsunoda outqualified him 12 races to 6 and also bet him in the driver's standings with 37 points to Ricciardo's 18. Yes, there were moments where Ricciardo had good pace, and Ricciardo fans will argue that RB strategy is the reason he didn't beat Tsunoda and he had the pace and all of these things. But even that conversation's wrong. The whole idea wasn't for Ricciardo to be fighting Tsunoda and narrowly beating him. That didn't even happen. The idea was for Ricciardo to prove that he could easily beat Tsunoda and prove he was the right driver for Red Bull. And it never happened. We had instances like China and Japan, where he ended up crashing and not even finishing the race. And ultimately, it all ended up in him being dropped at Singapore. Now, again, that's a story for another day. But as far as drivers go, he had some good points. He had the sprint race in Miami where he finished 4th and qualified 4th. But besides that, there was a lot of moments where Ricciardo didn't live up to expectations. To close up on Ricciardo, many are saying that he might come back with Andretti in the 11th team and there's heaps of interest in him. But ultimately, I feel like his time in Formula One's kind of over. I feel like we should just be letting him rest, enjoy his time, and let him decide what he wants to do. If we do see him back on the grid though, I'll be supporting him with open arms. Now, moving on to number 4, I've put Guanyu Zhou. Now, Zhou had a not bad 2023 season. I feel like he's finally got the experience and he's had a few good performances since being in the sport, and 2024 could have been his moment to prove he has what it takes to be not only the first Chinese driver in Formula One, but just a good driver in Formula One. Ultimately, F1 wants to reach out in China. They want to branch out with their fan base and popularity, and Guanyu Zhou is perfect for that. However, this 2024 campaign didn't really pan out how everyone would have hoped. Of course, a large part of that is the Sauber being an absolute pile of dog water. However, his overall performance, even relative to his teammate, who wasn't even performing that well, wasn't great. However, he struggled to score any points for the entirety of the season, with a few okay finishes with, I think it was an 11th in Bahrain, and he had a few other good performances just out of the points. He ultimately just didn't do good enough, especially in his qualifying. He ended up getting 8th in Qatar at the end of the season, and the only points for Sauber that season. However, he just generally wasn't up to par. Now, in terms of qualifying head-to-heads, ended up being 21-3 in favor of Valtteri Bottas. And Bottas is a shell of his former self. So the fact that Guanyu Zhou only managed 3 over Bottas is really something else. Number 3 for my most underperforming driver for the 2024 season, I've put the one and only Lance Stroll. Now, we're kind of gone from a driver who had everything to prove to retain his seat to a driver who's going to have his seat for as long as his dad still has money, which is going to be a very long time. Now, Stroll's been in the sport for a very, very long time now, and this whole season felt like one of his worst ones, to be honest. Of course, he's partnered with Alonso, and being the teammate of Alonso is a hard task for anyone, let alone someone who's there mainly based on money. But for Stroll, I feel like he's had some good showings. There's those moments where he shows that he can actually drive a Formula One car. And I think he only scored 8 points in the first part of the season, and it only got worse as the season went on. He declined and declined. Now, one of the low points was definitely China, where he ended up getting rear-ended by Ricciardo behind under the safety car, and he refused to take any responsibility for the incident.
This was at the hairpin. Oh, that is ridiculous.
It was a Constantina effect in the hairpin.
Stroll is already disliked by everyone, and I swear he's just trying to do everything he possibly can to make everyone dislike him even further. Now, there was also Brazil, where on the formation lap, he lost control of the car and ended up beaching it in the gravel, leading to not even starting the Grand Prix. And don't even get me started on the head-to-head versus his teammate. Now, if we look overall at the end of the season, Stroll ended up out-qualifying Fernando Alonso 5 times. However, in the other 19 instances, Alonso out-qualified Stroll. It was a very one-sided battle, but ultimately, I just feel like Stroll continues to not get any better, maybe even just get worse in terms of where he's at, in terms of the racecraft and performance, and he's becoming more and more unlikable as the seasons go on. 2024 was also a horrible year for Stroll. I think in half the races, I probably even forgot he was there because he was making such a little impact on the overall storyline of himself and of the sport. Now, in number 2, we've got America's pride, America's joy, Logan Sargeant. Logan Sargeant had an okay 2023. It was nothing special. He was an okay rookie in the Williams, all things considered, but ultimately got outshone by Alex Albon. Going into 2024, this is his time where, similar to Zhou, he's kind of got to show that he belongs in the sport and that he can actually do it. Now, that didn't happen. Specifically, I think Sargeant got worse in 2024, and it's hard to say, or it was hard to say, if it was just Albon being really good or not, because Albon seems to have smashed all his teammates. But with Colapinto taking the seat and giving Albon an absolute run for his money in the latter half of the season, it really shows how far off the pace Sargeant was that whole time. Now, if you don't know much about Sargeant, he actually had a pretty good junior career, and there were some moments where he showed genuine pace and that he was a good driver. But when you're in Formula One, your competition is very, very sharp, and he just couldn't really seem to match what everyone else was doing. It was already known that Sainz was going to race for Williams in 2025, so Sargeant knew he didn't really have a seat. And his poor performance, along with his crash-heavy situation, especially with his crash in the Dutch Grand Prix, really just showed how Williams had no benefit of keeping him on. Instead, Williams decided to test one of their other drivers in Colapinto, and I genuinely think it was a pretty good decision. Again, Colapinto probably made too many mistakes, but that's for another video. With Williams struggling to develop their car, needing more information, and wanting to get ready for the 2026 season, I really think that Sargeant was not the driver for that. Now, I'm sure you all know what that means about number 1. It can only really be one driver, and that driver has to be Sergio Pérez. Out of all the drivers on the grid right now, when you compared the average, I think it was the average points difference or the average qualifying difference between first and second drivers, if you added up all the gaps together, it wasn't as big as the gap between Verstappen and Perez for the 2024 season. Generally woeful. I think Perez is out here competing to get into Q3, whilst Verstappen was out here competing for wins. We had Red Bull lose the Constructors' Championship, and it was definitely not Max's fault. Max won the Drivers' Championship by far. It was all due to Perez underperforming. Going into the season, the idea was that Perez is supposed to be second to Max. He's supposed to be getting the victories when Max doesn't. He's supposed to be picking up the second places when Red Bull has the dominant car, and he just wasn't doing that. And as the Red Bull got slowly less dominant, Perez wasn't there to pick up the pieces. And because they didn't build that buffer early in the season, it meant they lost that championship. Now, specifically, there's a few events that come to mind. Qatar was definitely not a great one. He ended up spinning, missing out on crucial points. And again, there's a massive constructors battle going on. Maybe that would have been useful, but overall, he was struggling in qualifying. And then when you're starting between 8th and 14th on the grid every race, you're not going to be in contention for a win. You're going to be overtaking cars, getting stuck between midfield drivers, racing Haas. It's not what you want to be doing when you're driving the same car that the world champion is driving. His inability to qualify correctly, get on the podium, or support the team in any plausible way really set up for a disappointing season. And Perez has shown great moments in the past. He's the Minister of Defense. He's the king of the street circuit, but it just seems to have gone away. If you want more information on Perez overall, I made a whole video on the guy earlier in the year, so go give it a watch. But overall, he's my most disappointing driver for the season. 1, because of how much he's underperformed, but 2, because we know what this guy can do. It's not like he's an unproven rookie like a Sargeant or a Guanyu Zhou. He's gone from 20th to 1st in a race before in a midfield car. He's got many wins with Red Bull, and he's shown how good he is on a street circuit when it is his day, but he just hasn't been able to pull it together. Either way, they're my top 5 worst performing drivers for the 2024 season. Let me know your thoughts down below. This is a bit of an off the dome kind of video, so apologize if you wanted more detail. I'd love to start a conversation more than anything. Let me know your thoughts down below and join me for the next video, which is probably going to be in a week.